What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Joshi's Ramblings. I've been getting a lot of questions recently about allies, how I feel about like sanctifiers and subductors and voidsmen and assassins and blah blah blah, yada yada yada. And I kind of wanted to have a brief moment to kind of talk about my general thoughts about allies and why you don't see them very much in tournament play. And I think the best way to do that is to kind of compare the data sheets that we have for some common things that we see in agents to what we actually have in the guard codex. And so I've grabbed a couple of things that are similar points, similar model counts in order to try and directly compare them. And so the first one we have Kasrkin, and we're going to be comparing them to a couple of different data sheets, one of them being subductors. And you can kind of see that on the face of it, the data sheets are fairly similar in terms of what you'd expect from the power, right? Subductors have 11 models for 100 points, whereas Kasrkin have 10 models for currently 110 points. And the data sheets are actually reasonably balanced against each other. You have a better save on Subductors, so you're 3-up save and a 4-up invulnerable, whereas the Kasrkin just have a 4-up save. The Subductors have slightly better melee. They have 2 attacks at 411 on most of their character, or on most of the models, but they have worse shooting because they just have the pistols. They actually have an okay rule on fight on death 4 plus, and once per game they target something, they target an objective that they're nearby and make all of your opponent's units on that objective take a battle shock. This is a pretty reasonable unit. You see this pop up every now and then in Knights list. You will see this pop up every now and then in, or you like this is the like backbone of what you will oftentimes see of agents lists. And then on the other side, we have Kasrkin. Kasrkin, slightly worse, like raw data sheet in terms of the just base stats because we have the worst save, but we do have better shooting, significantly better shooting, but also noticeably worse melee. But it's also not really why you bring the unit, and it's got scouts, it's got the CP refund, it's got the Meltamine, and the warrior elite. Overall, like in terms of just raw data sheets, these are I would still probably take Kasrkin in this spot, but like the subductor unit is kind of in line with what you would expect in terms of just the raw data sheet if you compare them to Kasrkin. Okay, so let's take a look at another one, which is the Sisters of Battle Squad. This is a 10-man unit, and I believe it's 115 points for 10 models, and they actually have some pretty decent shooting. You have access to a bunch of flamers, you have access to melta guns and multi-meltas, you have access to the once per game free command rerolls. You can usually go for a save or reroll your damage. You also have sticky. Like, these are pretty good rules. The melee is also a little bit better. The defensive profile is a little bit better than what we have from Kasrkin, which, as you can see from the Kasrkin, once again, slightly worse defensively, honestly fairly comparable shooting. And the rules are like both good. The scout is good for Kasrkin, the sticky is good for sisters. And then the Voxcaster and the Meltamine are pretty good coming out from Kasrkin as well. So overall, once again, like Sisters may be a little bit worse than what we would expect from Kasrkin, but realistically, like fairly in line with what you'd expect to see from similar pointed data sheets if they were guard data sheets. Next, let's go ahead and compare something to Kree Combat Engineers, which is the Voidsmen at Arms. They're both on 25 they are both on 25 millimeter bases. They both have the same movement, same toughness, same save characteristic. Voidsmen are actually 2 OC, which is pretty nice. It's part of why this was something you'd oftentimes see in things like Knights, once again, because it was just dudes running around that can stand on objectives. For relatively cheap. Voidsmen actually have like reasonably similar shooting to what Kree Combat Engineers have, simply because Kree Combat Engineers just have just shotguns, whereas the Voidsmen at Arms have las guns with conditional lethal hits and a 2 damage shotgun, so that's kind of cool. And the melee is like about the same. Voidsmen at Arms, I believe, are 70 points for 6 models, including the little dog, but the big thing is that combat engineers, they have a better rule in grenadiers for the free grenades, and also a better like additional war gear rule in the remote mine. But overall, I would still say that Voidsmen at Arms may be a little bit less powerful overall than Kree combat engineers, but overall they are still fairly in line. Like if you just made this a guard data sheet as it was, like it would be reasonably competitive depending on the exact points of how much all of these units are going to cost. The other thing is we also have to keep in mind that there are units in the allies, like the Grey Knight Terminators, that we don't have a direct comparison to, because they are a Terminator model, and the closest thing we have is Bulgrin. But the main reason why you don't see these really come up all that often is because like they are in general slightly weaker than guard datasheets. Like guard datasheets are in general just really good, but I want to compare all of that in the context of they don't have access to the guard army rule, which is voice of command. And voice of command is up there for one of the best army rules in the game. It is incredibly powerful, and I would argue one of the major reasons why top players are having a lot of success as compared to the not as strong players is because the better you are or the better you understand how absolutely nuts voice of command really is, the better your success is going to be in the game. And while all of the agents units, while all of the allies are reasonably in line, they don't have access to voice of command. And so that means that all of the stats that we really look at, the OC, the move characteristic in particular, the save characteristic, they're actually kind of in favor of the guard models a lot of the time. Because 40K is a game where movement is so important, having an extra 3 inches of movement is an extra 50% of the movement characteristic of all of these models. It adds a ton of flexibility. It's a major reason why we don't have agents is because they only move 6. Whereas my Krieg engineers, if I need them to, they can move 9. The Kasrkin, if you just look at their ability, or if you just look at the weapons that they're bringing, they're probably like on par with like the sisters, just as it is. However, as soon as you give them first rank fire, second rank fire, or take aim, those meltas and those plasma guns are going to be doing way more damage than anything that the sisters have. And also, they can move 9. They can also go in guard transports. And that's one of the major reasons why, is whenever we're evaluating all of these allies, you need to not only look at why, or like, is this unit in line, right? Because voidsmen, subductors, sanctifiers are also a new addition that are kind of in line, like they are a reasonable data sheet. However, you always have to think, do I want this ally, or do I want an equivalent number of points in guard models that can move an extra 3 inches? Do I want an equivalent number of points in guard models that can be an extra OC? Do I want an OC3 Catachan man just running around? Do I want something that does a little bit more whenever I need it? Because all of the spots for a guard, it doesn't matter what the raw datasheet says if we can just make it better when we need it to be better. Um, that's why, whenever my opponents are asking, it's like, hey, how fast do your vehicles move? I'll tell them 10, but if I wanted to, I can make them move 13. How fast, or like, how many shots do these guys have? Oh, it's 2 shots in the plasma gun, but if I want it to be 3, I can. And so you will always have the best version of whatever stat you need at the time in order to actually take things. It's one of the most frustrating things for opponents to play against, and when we don't have access to that with all of our allies, it makes them a lot weaker. So what allies should guard ever really be considering? These are the things that we don't have just straight competitors to in our codex, right? We don't generally take a lot of the agents things. We don't take what do you call it? We don't take like subductors or voidsmen or sanctifiers because they are just competing directly in slot with a lot of guard things. However, where it becomes a little bit more interesting is things that we don't have direct counterparts to. And I think one of them that is a little bit interesting is the Attilan Rough Riders versus Death Watch kill teams. They're actually fairly comparable in terms of what you can like yeet them into and what they will actually do damage to. And the Rough Riders are a lot cheaper. They don't look the same necessarily, and one of the major differences is infantry versus mounted. But Attilan Rough Riders move 12, whereas Deathwatch kill teams can advance and charge if you give them access to the character. I think it's Watch Captain Artemis, I believe is his name. But Rough Riders can do a lot of the same things. They have a lot of similar threat projections, so they kind of do the same thing. Terminators are one where we can kind of do that, but they're also competing, like they're kind of competing with Bulgrin. They're kind of competing with Scions for just something that drops and just kills something if it needs to. But the but there are like Grey Knight Terminators are a little bit more interesting than everything else because we don't have a direct counterpart to it in Guard. They just are a little bit like outside of how Guard typically plays. So the ones that we do end up looking at all are the Calidus Assassin, which is again fairly directly competing with Gaunt's Ghost, but if you want to have both the Calidus and Gaunt's Ghost, it's pretty cool. And the Warglaive, the Armiger Warglaive. And the main reason why the Warglaive is so interesting is because it's OC8, and that's really about it. Like the main gun is a lot worse. Like the thermal spear, I think it's called. I mean, it's a decent gun, but it doesn't have access to the rerolls that makes it more consistent in Knights. It doesn't have access to the Feel No Pain that it has access to in Knights. It doesn't have access to Rotate Ion Shields. It is way less durable than equivalent points of Lehman Russes. So, like, it's not good for any of those other reasons. However, it is fast and it is OC8. And that's a reason to look at it because we don't have something that does all of those things that the Warglaive does all at the same time. So that's generally the thing that you need to be looking at when you're comparing allies is if I were to give the correct order at the correct time, how much better are these guard models? How much better are the guard data sheets than the allies just in general? And the answer is almost always way better. If you don't think that the voice of command makes the units way better, I think you need to reevaluate how you're using your orders in your game. So anyway, those are the general thoughts about allies in guard. They have to be way above the power level of just the curve of what you'd expect to get from your points, because guard are already pretty aggressive in terms of what we are getting for our points, and we have access to the best army, one of the best army rules in the entire game. So allies have to be notably better or doing something that we cannot get at all in the rest of our army. Anyway, hope that's been useful to you guys. This has been Joushi rambling, and we'll see you guys all next time. Bye bye.